Let me pray for us. Our Father, we thank you that we're able to gather and continue our discussion, and then starting to look at where society might be going based on the prevailing theories and philosophies that sadly are governing us as a Western culture these days. And Father, I pray that as we do so, you would continue to give us insight into our culture so that, again, in the end, we can be more intentional salt and light, that we can be more fervent in our prayers, and that we can be more effective in our evangelism by perhaps being able never to change the gospel, but use language or analogies that connect with people based on where they're coming from, so that, Lord willing, they can come to know Christ. And so, Father, that is our desire, and we ask that you would govern us and guide us in this class. In Jesus' name, amen. So I want to start off, by reading an article just to show you that this, see if you can pick up on some language. Why don't I say that? So this is, this came out, I believe it was yesterday. Yep, yesterday. It's from Fox News. Students signed fake petition to cancel Memorial Day. They call it a celebration of, quote, U.S. imperialism. All right, so listen to some of the language here. Students and other people walking around the Georgetown area of DC signed a fake petition ahead of Memorial Day to ban the holiday honoring fallen military service members. The petition, authored by Campus Reform, a conservative news site and higher education watchdog, calls for support to ban Memorial Day in the US, and the petition mentions banning American imperialism. So that's the fake petition. Fox News contributor, retired Marine bomb technician Joey Jones looks at this, and he says some of the people signing this, I was their age when I fought in my first war, and then he goes on to one young man who signed it. Young man tells the guy who's giving out the petition that he thinks Memorial Day is, quote, a celebration of U.S. imperialism and colonialism. It's not an attack on any individual, but more of a system, he explained. Later, when asked to expand on his thoughts about imperialism, the young man said, I didn't really think in this way until I went to college and I took women's and gender studies. And that put me on this path where I'm like, yeah, it's blank the US. For me, I was on this spirituality type journey where we're all one or whatever. And what I was learning in social justice was the material analysis I needed to practice. This sentence is weird. The material analysis I needed to practice what I feel like exists on the spiritual plane in real everyday life. Yeah, whatever that means, right? A young woman said that she thinks Memorial Day, quote, represents a lot of negative aspects of America and highlights something that people shouldn't necessarily be proud of. If we're going to honor and celebrate the dead, I think it should be those who lost their lives to genocide in America, she said. But you have this guy, spirituality type journey, gender studies, social justice classes, and we are on a spiritual plane. I'm trying to parse his run-on sentence here. We're on a spiritual plane, and this is what we need to do to reflect our oneness. So I thought, oh, some of those themes sound pretty familiar.
So Dana, that's legit. That's not Babylon B.
It's not Babylon B. No, this is not the satirical. This is, it sounds very much like it could be. If you don't know Babylon B, it's a great satirical news site, Christian. So you'll get your daily laugh out of it. But no, that's not a Babylon B article. That's right out of Fox. That's Fox News yesterday. And it's sad. It's sad, but that's where it is. So what I want to do is continue today. We'll go right to the video, and then there are 4 discussion questions at the end. But as he's talking about where society's headed, remember what I had said about our lovely. May I use your book as a or what am I trying to say here? Whatever visual image. Here's the book if you want to go and buy it. And so in this book and in these series of lectures, that book was written in 2010. These lectures are given in what that is, I have no idea. Go away. It went backwards.
Does that work when you yell at the computer like?
It does, usually. For me, it does. I can tell you that.
It doesn't do anything.
No. Yeah, it makes me mad. But the book in 2014, these lectures, or 10, and these books in 14, they seem to foreshadow, if not predict, things that we're seeing today. And so you may think that it's quote unquote prophetic. He never makes that claim. He's really coming at it as a theologian and sociologist, just saying, look, there's prophecy and whatever your views are on that. That's not what this is. This is just saying, here's where society is headed. And if what he's saying is true based on this revival of neo-paganism, then let's continue to go further. If it's brought us to this point, what should we expect to see from here on? And that's kind of what this video talks about. And so again, 2014, you're going to hear some things where you go, yep, he nailed it. and then, you know, even in the future, without, and here's always the X factor. God can intervene at any moment and change all of this, and we know that. But apart from him doing that, could it be that this is what society looks like? And he will actually reference this, and I've been thinking about this for a few years more intentionally. In Romans 1, we hear that God gave them over because of their sin, and this is what giving over looks like. And you have the whole sexual sin and homosexuality in particular, etc. But that's not the only thing that you see when God gives someone or a group of people over. And giving over is really him removing his hand of common grace, saying, I'm just going to let your sin run rampant. This is what you want. You have to live with the consequences. So it's a very frightening thing when God gives someone over. He argues that could be what is happening here. Because we don't know what God is doing in the moment, 99 times out of 100, 999,000, or times out of 1,000, you know, we can't quite say that God is giving us over, but it has all the hallmarks of that might be what's happening. That God may be removing in a very big way his hand of blessing, though he will always bless his people. All right, so we still have the blessing of Christ. So let me just launch this. Where is society headed? And I'll turn off the lights, and this should be off and running.
Well, after having looked at some of the intellectual, ideological factors that are creating the present culture in which we as Christians are called to live, I want to stand back and try to ask, so what is happening to this culture as a culture? And are we, as I suggested earlier, facing a culture making mistakes of moral laxity that will eventually right itself when the good sense of Americans kicks in? Or are we looking at a culture in dire straits, even a culture, as the Apostle Paul would say, given over? And I'm keeping that as an open possibility. One of the studies that is quite shocking is the work of the political scientist Charles Murray. I recommend reading this book, entitled Coming Apart, The Story of White America from 1960 to 2010. Charles Murray. His thesis is not encouraging. See the title of his book, America is Coming Apart. And what he means by that is he examines what was at the basis of our culture during its history, the four principles of cultural success from America's founding, and they are honesty, industry, marriage, and religion, summed up in the term virtue. How is virtue doing in the present society is really what he says. George Washington, in his farewell address, argued that so long as there remain any virtue in the body of the people, then we will never fall into monarchy, oligarchy, aristocracy, or other despotic or oppressive forms. So long as virtue is maintained. Murray, in his scientifically established conclusion, after all kinds of sociological polling and so on, says all is lost. The American project is dead. I'm taking phrases out of this book. The man is not a Christian, but he's looking at America as this social project. And unless a great awakening takes place that rediscovers these founding principles, all is lost. But can we expect this to happen? And if we cannot, indeed, all is lost. For Murray really doesn't look either at the religious side of things. It's only the sort of moral habits of the people. And so it doesn't see that there is arising this whole redefinition of human civilization based on the notion that man is God, which is where we really lose a culture. The political philosopher and former president of the Italian Senate, Marcello Pera, has stated the apostasy from Christianity is exposing the entire West to the risk of a grave cultural and political crisis, and perhaps even to the collapse of the civilization. So here you have people from Italy, the sociologist, arguing that our culture is lost. We're indeed seeing the collapse of the old culture, but few of these observers see that actually we're also watching the attempt to recreate a civilization based on totally other principles, based on really the rejection of the notion of the human being made in God's image. And so the moral crusade for sexual egalitarianism, which I think is the tip of the sphere, is running roughshod over the very notion of the image of God. It is indeed the embodiment and sacrament of oneism. Melanie Phillips, who I cited earlier, who talked about the attack on Western civilization, argues indeed that sexuality is the battering ram against the fundamental tenets of Western culture in order to destroy it and replace it with a new type of society altogether. And this revolution is taking place within a single generation. We used to say you're on the wrong side of history. Actually, that means you're on the wrong side with the latest news cycle. Things are happening so much. Falling apart morally. I read an article which said most industry watchers say fornication has never been as widely on display on television ever. And you know that. And not just on television, absolutely everywhere. The first essential mark of civilization, says an escapee from Stalinist Russia, Piotr Sorokin, the first essential mark of civilization requires that men take responsibility for their offspring. How are we doing on that level? Of course, this is all being undermined by this movement for sexual equality. Homosexuality was first presented following the 60s Cultural Revolution as one of the issues of individual civil rights. It wouldn't harm anybody. Just let us have our rights. But we've looked at queer theory during these lectures. And gay activist Paula Ettelbrick in 1997 said, being queer is more than sleeping with a person of the same gender. It means transforming the very fabric of our society. And just recently, the federal government appointed Kai Feldblum, a lesbian intellectual, proposed to the Senate as non-controversial by President Obama to write the end of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which will determine how businesses can employ people and what criteria shall be used. And this woman, Kai Feldblum, promised to use the power of the federal government to promote every type of relationship as equal to traditional marriage, including polyamorous relationships. That is, 3 or more people united in a sexual relationship. Is this a situation where everyone wins with the various positions being respected? Well, you know that a spoonful of deadly poison changes the water supply for everybody. One transgender teenage boy entering the girls' bathrooms with the full support of the school's administration changes the character of bathroom breaks for everybody. It's not just his rights that suddenly get respected, it's that other rights are refused. The reason is that what society allows must become normative in the way we run society. So by redefining marriage as the union of any 2 people, and eventually we will see this extended to any number of people, the belief in exclusive heterosexual monogamy is repudiated by federal law, and the normativity of pansexuality is affirmed by the highest laws of the land. So not only is toleration demanded, but also silence. We are required to give implicit agreement that sexuality is indeed multiform and should be open to everybody, including children. And so we see the invasion of the schools. The brainwashing of the next generation is underway. In the subtle introduction, both of Eastern spirituality and of what we call pansexuality. This is really a recruitment technique for the changing of the minds of the next generation of citizens who are sort of forced to believe that any sexuality is okay. You see, it's not that we keep in these little boxes. If you don't accept that, you are actually outside the law. You are discriminating, and that can be punished. So it's not like it was said that just give us our rights and we'll take care of ourselves. It's now the imposition of this worldview on everybody. The European Parliament demanded recently the passage of abortion as a human right, for certain humans anyway, and that children aged 4 to 6 should be informed about early childhood masturbation, same-sex relationships, and respect for those different lifestyles and concepts. Children as low as primary school need, says one activist, need accurate, impartial, non-judgmental information about heterosexuality, homosexuality, and bisexuality. What does non-judgmentalism mean, and impartiality, but a judgment and a partial statement against heterosexual normativity and a massive affirmation of pansexuality? So nothing is non-judgmental. I was reading a book recently by an Old Testament scholar, John Oswalt, O-S-W-A-L-T, The Bible Among the Myths. He's talking about the ancient world and how the Bible is so different from the pagan myths. And in a section entitled Denial of Boundaries, which is what he says ancient paganism affirmed, he says, the removal of boundaries between realms, human and gods, gods and nature, give rise to the immoral behaviors, occult prostitution, incest, homosexuality of the ancient world, but that they are not an unfortunate aberration or primitive behavior. They are theological statements, necessary expressions of the pagan worldview of which they are part. Isn't that interesting? That study of ancient paganism reveals that these sexual extremist expressions are not simply aberrations, but are essential to the very notion of paganism itself. And what are we seeing today? This denial of boundaries, that is, that things are separate, is going on at an incredible speed. You know, this whole politics of equality, you can give two meanings to that. Yeah, we all need to have equal rights. And yet that can very quickly become the leveling of all distinctions. And an example that came to me yesterday was in the Oklahoma State Capitol, where the atheists or occultists are demanding that next to the Ten Commandments is placed a statue of Baphomet, who is the Satanist's god, who is a male and female goat. And so you have equality here, you see, which really is an expression of the joining of the opposites. You relativize, actually, with much of this equality, you relativize all notions of morality. And you find yourself, you see, in a totally immoral culture. In the name of the rights of some, you have relativized everything. And you are discriminatory when you affirm your views of things, and you must be silenced. And that's really, I think, where we're going. And you've seen it on numerous occasions in the last few years. I like to call this program the elimination of the binary being two-ness. And I didn't make this up myself. I take the term elimination of the binary from homosexual leaders. Two lesbians wrote an article, can we put an end to the gender binary? Because there is no one way a person should be. I found it in a gay Jewish Bible scholar, J. Michelson, God versus Gay, who hails sexual minorities who, in transcending dichotomy, difference, into the zone of the sacred. So here's a very spiritual understanding of the elimination of the binary as the way forward spiritual, classic paganism. But this is happening, it seems to me, at all crucial levels of our present society. We have the destruction of the moral binary. You remember what Carl Jung said, thinking of good and evil as absolute opposites is wrong. We need to go for primordial wholeness, where right and wrong are relativized. In terms of epistemology, the theory of knowledge, according to postmodernism, distinctions between true and false must be abandoned as socially constructed illusions. So at the philosophical level, we're getting rid of the binary of true and false. In terms of science, the human is being joyously celebrated as co-creator of the cosmos. the binary of the creator and the creature is being eliminated. We're seeing the elimination of the binary of the distinction between animals and humans. As the TV program Animal Planet says, animals are persons too. And in New York State, Tommy, a 26-year-old chimp, is recognized as a cognitively complex, autonomous legal person. The binary of animals and humans is going away. In politics, the removal of the political binary, the totalitarian state, says one scholar, aims at obliterating all distinctions between itself and its citizenry, controlling every aspect of organized life. As somebody said, a left-wing person recently, your children belong to us. Isn't that interesting? That's where our politics wants to take us. Removal of the religious binary, we have seen it in previous lectures, where the non-dogmatic spirituality of Hinduism is fiercely defended, and the notion of Advaita, not two, is proposed as the spiritual way forward. The destruction of the binary in spirituality between us and God is collapsed, and the future is non-dual, Advaita. Thus, we find the proposing of yoga in the schools and Buddhist mindfulness as ways of suppling up the culture to open its mind to this non-dual way of thinking. In theology, of course, liberalism has always tried to eliminate the binary view of God. Ex-Bishop John Shelby Spong says, theism is dead. God is separate from the creation. That's where the Episcopal Church was going. But the emergent church also affirms the work of Diana Butler Bass, I'll talk about her later, as a welcomed spiritual awakening. Who, her name is Diana Butler Bass, defines God in less dualistic terms. How do you get less dualistic? I'm not sure. And the praying to God, our mother, the nourishing spirit of Mother Earth, is the future of Christianity. And she is endorsed by a number of emergent church leaders. The binary of Christian uniqueness is being taken away. Mainline Protestant communities are facing the shift towards religious pluralism, the triumph of multiculturalism, of progressive Christianity, where we hear the announcement of the arrival of religionless Christianity, shorn of any creeds and dogmas, any notion of the Bible as unique and inspired, but a faith borne along by the breath of undefined spirit. And that the next stage in the Christian faith is interfaith, the spiritual experience of interfaith. In eschatology, we're losing the binary of the ultimate distinction of heaven and hell. Sinners in the hands of an angry God is a joke for the modern mind. Alas, when you get rid of that, though, there is no ultimate justice, no final accountability with regard to real evil. Can you see what that does? Hitler is in heaven. He was not guilty of crimes, but of mistakes. And so the very nature of the judgments that God alone can use are eliminated with the rejection of heaven and hell. Obviously, the rejection of the binary of sexuality and gender leads the dance as we see the attack upon gender. In Sweden, they now develop gender neutral pronouns because we can't stand affirming male or female. I mentioned earlier, M and F is disappearing from official documents. A New York Times article in 2012 said, entitled, "Can a Boy Wear a Skirt to School?" And this was proposed as the forward-looking cohort of the population for whom gender fluidity is a creative playing field. You see, the rising generation has been so brainwashed into thinking that gender distinctions have to go. That's the future. And the theological basis, of course, is the joining of the opposites, which is essential to a pagan worldview of oneism. Our world is very similar to that of Paul's time. The reality that perhaps what reigned in Rome is coming back. Isaiah said of apostate Israel, "Justice is turned back and righteousness stands far away, for truth has stumbled in the public squares and uprightness cannot enter. Truth is lacking, and he who departs from evil makes himself a prey." The Apostle Paul concludes as he looks at the Roman Empire, "For this reason, God gave them over to dishonorable passions and to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done." Is our culture at this stage, the stage of being given over? Alas, because of the intimidation factor, a number of Christians are tempted to give in. Let's not do that.
I'm just going to keep it there for a second before I pull up some questions for us. But thoughts, reactions to what you heard. Again, this is 2014, and so you just had, hey, can you believe it? Some people are trying to get rid of gender pronouns. And we say, but what jumped off the screen, if you will? What hit you? Big, broad question, I realize, but the floor is open. I just want to get your thoughts.
I guess it seems so overwhelming. It seems like almost like we're defeated already. And I know that the last few classes here, you said you're going to talk about what can we do about it. But it seems so huge. It's from the government all the way down to preschool. And it almost feels like it's overwhelming. And we have two sons, 21 and almost 24, and they're more out there than we are. And we talk to them about subjects like this sometimes, and my boys are both Christians, but it's like, Mom, it's their choice. Dad, it's their choice. We can't do anything about it. It's up to them. And hard to explain some things to our sons that this is wrong, this is sin.
I am with you. This book here, and pull this first slide up. Live Not by Lies, a Manual for Christian Dissidents by Rod Dreher. Just came out last year. I had been alerted to it by a great podcast, The Mortification of Spin, which is a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, but it has Carl Trueman is one of the co-hosts, and they were recommending this book. And really what it is Dreher goes back to interview, I don't know if it gets it there, but anyway, he interviews a number of people who were raised under totalitarian systems, whether it was Soviet Russia, or many of the Eastern Bloc countries, right? And for them, it seemed like it was the end of it, right? What's going to happen here? And two things jump out. One, to a person, they are surprised that we as Westerners and specifically as Americans don't see what's happening before our very eyes. Because what he calls soft totalitarianism, which is everything that has been presented here. So it's not a militaristic totalitarianism, though who knows if it could become that, but that's not what he says is happening. It's more the takeover of the culture by a dominant ideology that silences opposing viewpoints. And I think that is becoming more than theory, it's becoming demonstrable, right? We're seeing that happen. And so these people are saying, this is exactly what happened. How are you not seeing this? So that's one of the foci of the book. The other one is, but God is still sovereign even when, and in your case, if this comes to its end game and you become a totalitarian culture. God will preserve his people, though not without pain for you. And so it's really let's be in prayer. Let's understand what's happening in society. And it does seem very, very overwhelming. But remember that God can make the dry bones live with just a word. So could it be that God is taking things away from us because we were never promised blessings this side of heaven? We don't, it sounds pessimistic, but I'll give you a 10-cent theological term here. It's called an overly realized eschatology. How about that? Anybody know, want to take a guess what that means? Overly realized eschatology? What's your eschatology? What's that referring to?
Future things.
Future things, your view of the end times, right? So we all have an eschatology, whether it's formulated and we can articulate it or not. We have an understanding, a basic understanding how we think things are going to end, right? So an overly realized eschatology is taking promises that are meant only for heaven. They're given in scripture and they're only meant for heaven and trying to pull all of them into the here and now. So yes, the kingdom of God is breaking in, but we don't want to pull the promises of the not yet here. And the group that's really most guilty of that are your health and wealth preachers, right? They promise basically heaven if you just have enough faith. They have an overly realized eschatology. But we can have it without knowing it as well by thinking if we just follow God, or if our culture just follows God, whatever that means, especially culturally, then the blessings of heaven will always be upon America or upon whatever we are. And so we want to be careful of not having that, and instead remember that the most this world is going to give us is dead flowers, if you will. It's going to give us thorns and thistles and weeds and all these things that you see in, start to happen to God's created order at the fall when God's doling out punishment, right? We're going to have not labor, but hard labor, right? It's now going to become difficult for us. We're always pilgrims on the way. So in many ways, this is saying, guys, if God does give our culture over, there was never any promise that he wouldn't. In fact, it's only his blessing that has stopped him from doing it to this point in the first place. But remember, he's sovereign, right? So there's the book. Does that bring consolation to you, and you're not obviously the only ones whose kids are, adopting different things. No, it doesn't bring consolation. It's telling you what you already know, that God is still sovereign. But I will give you a sneak peek of the last two classes coming up here. Your persistent faithfulness and love for your children, modeling Christ, is going to be, one, it's the most you can do, right? You can't change anybody's mind, right? But never underestimate that, especially the love of a mother and a father. Never, ever, ever underestimate that. So God is a covenant God. He is faithful. to his elect. I believe that. This is now my Reformed theology coming out, but I believe that. I believe he purchased a group of people, and he will persevere. They will persevere because he will preserve them. Though it may be a bumpy path until we get there and say, oh, finally sin is gone. So, that's just a teaser of some things that, the mindset we can have moving forward. But give me I want some other thoughts, and feel free to unmute yourself online there if you want to jump in, because we can hear you. So feel free to give me some other thoughts of what you saw here before I ask some questions. Yeah.
I don't know, I just have, maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but I have hope in our relationship with Christ and his view and working in the world, because many times in the Old Testament, God could have given people over and left them, but he always remained faithful.
And I can't disagree with that. I can't disagree with that at all. And that's why, to put my cards on the table, I find myself very much relating to Peter Jones, probably with the same mindset, saying, I feel I'd be negligent if I did not put the Romans 1:26 out there, especially as a pastor, that this very well could be happening. However, right, I can't say beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is what is happening. And even if we're on the precipice of it happening, it doesn't mean that God will not mercifully intervene. And he very well may. And I agree. And there's
And he
plenty
might
of
not.
examples. I'm sorry?
I said, and he might not.
And he might
but I
not.
don't want to give up hope.
Correct.
You know.
Correct. Great point.
We had supported years back Anatol Bukovsky. He was Ukrainian, coming out of right after the Soviet Union fell. We supported him getting his doctorate at Gordon Conwell. He started UETS, which was the Ukrainian Evangelical Seminary, training seminary. But anyways, his testimony was that they call it Soviet times, that during Soviet times, from a very young age, like in 7th and 8th grade, if they were Christians, they were paraded in front of the auditorium, and they were basically berated by the entire school.
Wow.
So if you were a professed Christian, you were not allowed to get a professional job. You were not allowed to go to university. Just really suppressed the people, but yet God brought them through it. His father did not see this, but he saw it. But it was very difficult during Soviet times. So it's kind of like hope, like Lois says, but it also, we could be facing this time when you profess Christianity and the values of Christianity, which I do see happening. You can lose your job because if you say something that somebody is offended by, you can lose your job now. So it's not unlike that. Or if you behave in a certain way in school, there may be consequences. I don't know.
Or if they find a post that you put on there
Yes.
10 years ago, take it out of context. And that's
Yeah.
happening too in today's cancel culture, right?
So, I mean, I'm just saying this is another totalitarian society. God was faithful to a remnant, and that remnant, to my knowledge, I mean, we haven't supported him in a while.
Sure.
And have communication with him. But that remnant was supported enough that they started seminary and were going out into all of Ukraine and even into Russia to preach the word.
Kathleen, I thank you for that, because as you're saying this, the past 2 years I've been, serving at this Chinese church, and there's a woman on staff who does not appear on the website. But she worked for us. So half the year she was here, half the year she was in China or in Taiwan, depending on the political heat. She runs an underground seminary. And so there was another guy from Westminster Seminary who was interning with us. And he came in the staff meeting one day and he said, oh, my parents' church was just shut down this weekend. So, I mean, this was like not theoretical anymore. This is real
In China.
in China. Yeah, yeah. So this, here he was, right? This is his parents, and he was wondering what's going to happen with them, and et cetera, et cetera. So you look at these totalitarian states and cultures, and it's the same story. God was faithful. He brought us through. And in some cases, especially in China, the church is actually booming. Right. And so, and we see that even in the book of Acts, when persecution turns up, the church is scattered, sometimes against its will, but that becomes God's means of spreading the gospel. And, you know, so this could be a real blessing in disguise. Do I want, does my flesh want to go through, you know, what may be coming? No, you know, I don't at all. I'll be honest with you, I don't. But that's where I need the Spirit of God to remind me of doctrine, to override my flesh and say, but this may be coming, but remember, I'm faithful. And yet I may turn the tables, right? And so just keep it out there. That's where we are. That's where we are. Yes, yeah.
One thing I've noticed is, again, being new, new Christian, new
Sure.
Catholic, I've felt this way for years and never understood why. So
Yeah.
that's why I enjoy this class very
Yeah.
much. But myself, coming from an uneducated, so
Sure.
to speak, background, instruction, what I feel is there is a lot of people in this country that feel the way we feel.
Right.
But just don't know it.
And they don't have
And
any
they don't-
words to it, right?
They don't
Yeah,
have the words.
yeah, yeah.
So for the last 3 or 4 weeks, since I've been doing this class,
Yeah.
I've been talking it up at work, and it's crazy how many people really think the
Interesting.
way we think.
Yeah,
So it's not so doom and gloom. I want to say it, maybe the younger generation is going to
Right.
carry the country, and
yeah,
we're all retired and can't do it anymore.
yeah.
But for right now, I
Just
think-
don't get old is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, I wish.
Especially in construction.
Yeah, but I definitely think that there's a lot of hope,
Yeah, yeah,
because the old saying is, hey, we might not be involved, but that's because we're too busy working.
right.
And the kid living in his parents' basement that's putting all this stuff out
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Has the ear, so to speak, but they don't have the will.
right.
So
Right.
I'm thinking that maybe there's a little more, less doom and gloom.
No, I appreciate that. I do. I want to take one thing that he said and transition a little bit, because much of what we're seeing in culture, it depends on who's saying it, because words are so fluid, right? So he mentioned equality, and equality is in one sense a good thing, right? We want equal rights. Obviously, that's a good thing. But equality can mean a complete kind of, leveling of all distinctions. And that tends not to be a good thing in the end. Some distinctions perhaps, but there are some distinctions that are just needed. And even in a totalitarian system, there's still a distinction, even though the government's saying, hey, we're all one. Not really. The government's saying, I'm in control. There's the distinction. I'm the leader, you're not. Right. So, but we're seeing some good motives by people, but because of our sin and in one sense, God just giving humans over to their sin, our sin takes a good concept. For example, racial equality. It's a wonderful concept, obviously, but then imports so much meaning to that it goes this way. And Caleb and I were talking on the way up. I said, one movie that we'll watch at one point, because it has my favorite actor in there, Denzel Washington. But did you ever see Cry Freedom? Old movie. He plays Stephen Biko. Stephen Biko was killed under apartheid. And I first learned of Stephen Biko through Peter Gabriel's song Biko. And but Stephen Biko was killed under apartheid. He was a peer of a Nelson Mandela figure. And just an excellent, he's a young Denzel Washington, but he nails the part. Well, you look at that and you say, and I told him, I said, when Nelson Mandela was released and then became president, he took a tinderbox that was ready to explode and handled it with grace and poured water on it to put it out, because he easily could have said, time to turn the tables, right? I'm in charge now, and we're just going to have reverse racism. And many people probably would have turned a bit of a blind eye for a bit, thinking, yeah, these Afrikaners deserve it, right? Because of just how oppressive that was. But he didn't do that. And he handled it with grace, much like a Martin Luther King was trying to do. But so there's somebody who was fighting for racial equality, but did it through the right way, versus much of what you see happening with BLM, et cetera. So the concept may be great, and we may agree with it, but depending on who's approaching it, they may be approaching it from an angle that we just can't go with them as Christians. So with that said, we have the leveling of the opposites. We have some chats here. I just want to say, I am online. May I comment? Yes. Mary Ellen, jump in. Sorry.
Good morning, Pastor and group. Pastor, I met you. I came into the office one day to get a book from Donna Williams.
Yep.
I'm a high school teacher, and yes, this is really very overwhelming. There are probably about 8 teachers that I'm aware of in the building that have, we'll say, politically conservative perspectives.
Yep.
We talk in whispers. We have been called on the carpet and subtly and not so subtly warned if we speak up. I'm just walking through something this past week with an instructional assistant who brought things that are being taught to the attention of a supervisor. And it was high anxiety for her all week. So what I'm thinking is that it's overwhelming. We don't know even where to begin. But what I'm going to say is I'd like to see if there is a way that we can somehow organize parents who have children in the school. The place to go is the school committees, and voice your concern over, first, the curriculum that is coming in. The curriculum coming in, I've already been exposed to some of it. The teachers are being exposed to portions, and the parents are not aware of what the teachers are being exposed to. Teachers, whether Christian or not, are afraid to speak up no matter what, because they will in fact be warned, and probably we're on the track of being targeted to lose our jobs. The other thing is, so you want to question that. You also want to question, particularly in history department, it's not only what they're saying, it's what they're not saying. In American history, US history too, I inquired, why are not the kids learning about the American role in the World War and in reference to the Nazis? And the response is, well, America joined late. We really didn't have much to do with that. So Hitler, now this is an affluent town. This is the other thing I want to let you know. It's fast and furious in affluent towns. It is not coming as fast and furious in working class towns. So be thankful if you have kids in a working class town school system, but it is in fact there, creeping in, and school systems are not going to listen to their teachers. They are apt to listen to parents. That's the response we hear as a teacher. Are the parents complaining? Now, parents will complain about 2 things: low grades, and if their kids are unhappy about a teacher. You can't really rely on your kids to come home and tell you what is and isn't being taught, not because your kids are secretive, but because they don't actually know what's going on. So you want to get a handle on the curriculum. You want to get people to look at the curriculum. You want to look for hidden things in the curriculum. And by hidden, I mean the overt is obvious. It's what you're talking about now with this video. But the hidden is what they are not saying. And the other thing is you want to make it clear to your administration that if your student is spoken to or called to the office, you want to know. I'm in a system where kids have gone to the office, where teachers have reported pretty horrendous things that kids have done, and the administration is not telling the parents, whether it's sexual harassment or kids calling teachers. I had kids call me an F&B, and really they got a detention and they were taken from my class and allowed to go to the library instead of coming to my class. So you won't know those things, is what I'm telling you. So thank you for letting me get this out, you know.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Rick, I'll turn to you in a second.
I was going to ask, when she refers to curriculum, is she referring to curriculum in general or the sex ed curriculum specifically?
Mary Ellen, did you hear that? When you refer to curriculum, are you referring to, you know, curricula in general or sex ed in specific?
Every aspect of curriculum. The other thing is you would want to be checking the syllabuses of each of the teachers and then following exactly what they are doing. This was the call made by an instructional assistant. She's sitting in a classroom where there is a high school teacher, very, very heavy presenting white supremacy, having the kids take tests to see if they are racist. And it's not in the syllabus. And she did bring it to the attention of the supervisor of the English department. Now, this IA is waiting, really wondering if she's going to get fired. I told her my experience is she may not get fired, but she may get moved to a different school. I was moved from department to department because I'm a special ed teacher and they can do that. But in my school system, in the very beginning, we had a person sent by the state for professional development, and it was all about woke. And I turned the volume down because I never trust myself not to speak up. And when I speak up, it's not good for me. But in the end, I realized that she had given the teachers a test and she had begun her presentation that teachers had to sit through for professional development for about 2 hours by saying to us, this is going to be uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable, you should be. So I did question her at the end. I was the last person to be allowed to speak. And she said, I see on the chat, Mary Ellen, and the superintendent yielded to me. And so she said, okay, Mary Ellen, you have the last word. So I said, well, Cindy, brace yourself. My colleagues aren't going to like this, but I'm going to tell you when someone tells me how to feel, I'm going to turn off. And we went on to have a conversation that she then tried to manipulate. The next day in my mailbox from the superintendent's office was the book White Fragility. So this is what I mean by subtle and not so subtle. And what I'm saying to you is everything that she presented to the teachers, all of this woke, that stuff is being woven into everything. The other thing is social emotional learning has become a standard across the country. So your children, just like there's standards in English, history, blah, blah, teachers are supposed to be weaving this social emotional curriculum into their classes. Now, if it were neutral, that would be okay, except why they're doing it is because they're finding parents are letting their kids, parents are not feeling responsible for their offspring. So public schools are taking on that task of educating the kids because they're coming in socially and emotionally off, let's say. And unfortunately, I do see that that's true, but the public schools are now using that to teach what you should and shouldn't be saying. And I've been telling the administration, you're teaching values and ethics, and they're telling me they are not. I'm telling you they are. And we are not, we are gun-toting, religion-clinging people. And at very best, we are old-fashioned. And that's kind of laughable to these people. I could go on forever, but I'm going to cut myself off.
No, I appreciate this, Mary Ellen. I'm not going to out her and tell you where she's teaching out, but I do remember our conversation quite well, and I also remember how Mary Ellen received a bit of a reprimand, if you will, for showing a video that she had been showing for years, the same person, but because it was an African American, it was actually Ben Carson, and it was how his story of coming out of, his mom can't read, and he just realized that not long ago, right? And how he became one of the most accomplished physicians in the nation. If somebody would be an absolute fool to argue against his medical training. Right. You don't become the chief pediatric surgeon at Johns Hopkins because you're a fool. But because it was Ben Carson, who's affiliated with President Trump, right, you can't show that anymore because it's a trigger for people. And so that's the stuff that's happening. And so this was not planned. So thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you.
But this is thank you. Anytime. But here's one veteran, and I'll say this is not a rookie, right? Here's one veteran educator in a school system within a 20-minute radius of this church. Yes.
So I would, Mary Ellen, then probably inadvertently, my husband and I were probably wrong. This is back.
What?
You're always wrong. 2005, our daughter was taking AP English in Middleborough, Mrs. Osborne. And Mrs. Osborne was an avowed, I think, atheist, whatever. And she was teaching atheism through literature.
Yeah.
And she was teaching this to the whole class. And Leah would come home. Fortunately, we had a really good relationship. We discuss it. And Leah has these conversations that at first we thought were coming out of her mouth, but they never did. Thank goodness. But Leah would sit there through the entire class, but that's God stupid. That's God stupid. That's God stupid.
Yeah.
So we were comfortable that Leah was strong enough to, in her mind, counter it, but we never said anything. And we should have.
Yes.
And that's what she's saying. We never said anything.
Right.
We never spoke up.
But the question now is, and if I can, I know I didn't raise my hand or anything, but part of when we started this class was, where does politics, where do
Right.
Christians engage in this? And sometimes we think about Trump, we think about folks at a much higher level of politics, but Mary Ellen is dealing with politics.
Right.
And the question for me needs to be much more clear. What is my responsibility as a Christian in the political forum? I recognize that God's perfect plan is going forward, but we're all soldiers.
Yeah.
Something we have to be doing, can't just be marching in place.
Yes.
The thing I like about what Mary Ellen is saying in a very practical way, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Ellen, is you take exactly what Peter Jones referenced, taking responsibility for your offspring.
Yes.
And so engaging the school committee as a parent. Now, we're all going to come at this from a political point of view, even if you think you're not political, you are, right? I mean, we all have our politics. But it's also saying, wait a minute, I'm also a Christian, and hopefully my faith is informing my politics, right? But just as a Christian, because of the ethics and values that I discern are being taught, just like Mary Ellen said, as a parent, I need to speak up to the school board and the school committees. Will I be heard? Well, that's a different story. But I need to be the persistent widow, you know, if you will, and speak up on behalf of our kids. Is that accurate, Mary Ellen? Is that something did I get
Yeah.
that right?
Yes, and I've been seeking the Lord. I often do. I want to speak up so often. My son happens to be an attorney, but he's a real estate attorney. He did go through the Middleborough school system. And when I call him to ask him a question, my son says, "Mom, get your pension. Please don't talk. I'm a real estate attorney. I don't practice in Massachusetts." So I've been straining and straining, and I just have come to the point where I keep thinking God does want me to be quiet. I'm a single parent. I'm in my late 60s, but I don't know that that's so. And I guess what I'm saying is, if people are willing, I would like to become more organized. I would like to be able to be more informative in a way that we can approach school systems, of course, respectfully, but as you just said, that's great, persistently. And so this church is the only church that I'm aware of that has been able to, I think what I noticed is called these other, what we would consider pagan theologies, teaching about theologies as opposed to a political pulpit. So I think that's a perfect foundation for conversations that we can have. And yes, and my sons in-laws are very active. One of his people is a spokesperson for Right to Life, and she's putting me in contact with someone in other words, they're people that know how to be organized and speak up, and those are the things I want to learn, and those are the things I'm wondering, does anyone else want to learn and come alongside?
Tell you what, why don't we do this? If anyone, is interested, I can always connect you with Mary Ellen and vice versa. And then you guys can, see where the Lord leads you there. But that is a very boots on the ground approach. One thing I just want to give the teaser for next week. No, thank you. Which is, let me get rid of this and pull my thing back up. There we go. And just show you the questions that I want to begin with. Yeah, that's okay. This was actually, I wanted this to go on because I enjoyed it. And I think it was practical. But here you go. Start thinking about these. So we'll start with this next week, but be in prayer and be thinking about it. Many today argue that the Christian notion of hell needs to be discarded and that a loving God would not damn anyone. Explain how this line of reasoning is influenced by onist ways of thinking. Remember, he talked about the elimination of the opposites, heaven and hell, in terms of eschatology. So that's where that question's coming from. A, do you think that this is the view of many people? I guess the second one, the way you define many, the word many at the beginning, when you look at surveys done, if you go to stateoftheology.com, you'll see Ligonier Ministries surveys that they do every 2 years, and they just released one last year. And it polls self-professing evangelicals. And I'll let you know that self-professing evangelicals, by and large, well, let me put it this way, there's a large minority of them who reject hell. And what does that do? How does that change things? So we'll talk about that. Number two, Dr. Jones explains that it's not only toleration of non-Christian sexuality that is demanded, but silence from the opposition. I guess, do you agree with that or not? So we'll talk about that. When should Christians voice their opinions in this matter, and how should they do it? That's very much, at least one approach in the schools is what we were just talking about, right? So we'll talk about that. Number three, if the educational system is promulgating an essentially pagan worldview, how can Christian churches and families best counteract such teaching? So I promise you, Mary Ellen did not see this slide, but that's very much what we were talking about. And then four, if paganism seeks to eliminate oppositions, including the distinction between right and wrong, how can there be any sense of justice? Contrast this pagan impulse, the first question, with the Christian view of justice. If there's no right and wrong, then is Hitler in whatever view of heaven you want to come up with? Is that true? Could it be that there's really no reason to fight against anything and just do you let it go? Does that really sound, even to your guys at work?
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, does that
Because
really
there's
sit well in the heart?
No, because there's that, I don't know how to word it, but there's that inner soul, whatever you
It's
want.
called the image of God. my
And
friend.
25
Yeah.
stories in the air hanging on a piece of iron.
That's exactly it.
There is no, I'm better than you, so I'm gonna throw you off.
Right.
Because it just doesn't work.
And I'll say, I'll give you a preview of this last one. How, if there's no sense of right and wrong hardwired into the soul, which there is, right? I mean, it's the image of God and it's the portion of the law written on every human heart. But if it's not there, then how do you explain that virtually every culture that we know has ever existed has some level that you do not cross in terms of murder? Now, some are more accepting of that than others. I'm not saying that it's this, you know, there's a perfect culture out there, but there is some level of this is right, this is wrong. Where does that come from if it's not hardwired into who we are? But we're trying to see an elimination of that. All right. So that said, think about these things. I will post all this whole discussion online. And there we go. Let me close this in prayer. Father, thank you for this rather robust discussion this morning. Thank you for Mary Ellen sharing, and then the various other viewpoints and questions that people have articulated. Lord, the last two class sessions are really how not to respond and how to respond from a biblical point of view. So it is now the response portion in particular. And that's where, Lord, we need to take the theoretical and make it practical. And so, Lord, we're going to probably have different thoughts, different ideas how to do that. I pray that your Spirit will guide us so we honor one another, be creative, and seek to leave this room and enter into our mission field every single time with a definite eye fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Because without that, then we're just going to become a resounding gong and a clanging cymbal, Lord. And that does nobody any good. So we want to reflect you properly, and we need your Spirit to do that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right.